And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
I don't care!
What's next?
What's next?
What's next?
Don't you want to hear what's next?
What are you going to do next?
What's next for you?
What's next?
What's next?
Okay, so what's next?
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of After the Gold, a weekly series where we cover Best Picture follow-up movies. That is to say, the movie that a director makes right after winning Best Picture. We talk about how it got made, the production history, what its relevance is today, how many Oscars it ended up getting or not getting, and then some of my thoughts on the film later on. We don't have any kind of a structure. We kind of jump around the 80s, 90s, 2000s, all different kinds of eras. Ultimately, though, talking about movies that I find interesting, that either have interesting production history or the movies themselves are interesting. And we've been having a lot of fun with this series so far. So if you're interested in me covering a specific video or film or a specific director, feel free to comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on either upcoming series or what you thought of the movie covered today. But without further ado, today we are covering 1987's broadcast news, and in this first part of the video, I want to talk about the production history and how this movie got made, and the kind of relevance and why I wanted to cover ultimately broadcast news. But before we go forward, we have to go backwards and talk about 1984's Terms of Endearment, a really unique scenario here, where sometimes when we talk about Best Picture winners on this series, it's the case of Martin Scorsese in The Departed, and it's finally, his time to win. And it's an old legend. And sometimes it's the case of James L. Brooks, a very unique scenario where this was actually his first film, Terms of Endearment. He was a big TV guy, created Taxi and the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and was known for that kind of sitcom-y dramedy. Makes Terms of Endearment. It starts out to be a pretty good hit, a pretty successful hit, and then each and every week, word of mouth grows. And on its 11th weekend, it ends up becoming number one at the box office for that weekend. So it was a huge, something that never really happens today, huge word of mouth hit that stays in theaters and just quietly grows and grows and grows. By the time that the movie ends up winning Best Picture, it's a huge hit, one of the biggest hits of the year, helps launch the movie star career of someone like Deborah Winger, and is a unique scenario in which back in the 80s there really was a clear divide between you're a TV person and you're a movie person, and James L. Brooks made that transition so well from becoming a big TV guy to now being into movies and winning Best Picture on his first film. A huge kind of accomplishment for a director that had so much kind of power and juice at the time. He could have done really anything after this, do more TV, do more film. He eventually does do the Simpsons and kind of helps produce and create that, and that kind of sets him up for a long time. But he also puts his eyes towards directing, and 4 years later makes 1987's Broadcast News. Interesting production history and just how much he spent a lot of time in New York and Washington, D.C., hanging out with people in the news, hanging out with people in politics, doing a lot of research before even writing the script and then eventually directing the movie. The movie is a classic Best Picture follow-up in that it gets nominated for Best Picture. It's a pretty solid hit. It's everything that Terms of Endearment was, except maybe a little bit of a step down. Doesn't win Best Picture, but still gets nominated for Best Picture. Doesn't win any Oscars like Terms of Endearment does, but still gets a bunch of nominations. Is a hit, not a massive hit on the success of Terms of Endearment. And it's also a classic Best Picture follow-up in that I think its modern-day reputation is that Broadcast News is a better movie than Terms of Endearment, and arguably James L. Brooks' best movie and maybe one of the best movies of the 80s. I think, though, that this movie has a unique modern-day reputation because amongst film fans and people within the media, they really love this movie, and I think there's an added level of appreciation between critics and people in the media to celebrate this kind of a movie. And I don't know if that has translated into the more general public, because James L. Brooks is a filmmaker that hasn't made a movie in 15 years, and this was maybe his last great movie in, almost 40 years ago now, so it's almost him as a filmmaker is a bit kind of in the cult status, a little bit lost to time. When we think about a year like 1987, which was a great year for movies, I think of Full Metal Jacket, I think of Predator, I think of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. even those movies have some sort of connection to the modern day era. You can go, Steve Martin, still a big TV star, so people will check out his old movies. Full Metal Jacket, Stanley Kubrick, legendary director, people still want to check out and see his movies. Predator, they're making another Predator movie this year, it's IP. But with broadcast news, you have a director in James L. Brooks who isn't in that kind of cult status because he's not like a Scorsese or a Spielberg who are still making great movies today to foster new film fans. And then you look at its three main leads, Albert Brooks, who was a big deal in the kind of 80s, but hasn't been as kind of, I think, culturally relevant in some of the movies he's been in, hasn't done as much really, now that he's retired and older. Holly Hunter, her last movie that was kind of culturally relevant, I think, is The Big Sick, and that was 10 years ago now, and she's done some TV, but doesn't really work too much. And then William Hurt recently passed and was probably best known for Thunderbolt Ross, but in the MCU, but that's not kind of a major star status level. Really, the kind of peaks of all these actors' careers were in the kind of 80s and 90s, and interestingly, though, why I think of this is such a classic 80s movie is because so much of these actors maybe aren't as famous today as they were back then, because the director isn't in the kind of cult status of a legendary director. So you have this movie that is well respected, but it is kind of in its own silo of a particularly 80s movie, a 40-year-old movie. So its relevance today, I think, is maybe heightened amongst film fans, and that's the way I managed to see it. But I'd be curious to hear, a 25-year-old who's not really into movies, have they even heard of this movie? Do they really know the names of the stars? Is it kind of lost to time a bit within this era and within this context? So it was kind of a fascinating movie for me that I wanted to cover, and that its production history is somewhat interesting, but the movie itself, which I really do enjoy, is in this kind of split moment where some people think it's the best of the 80s and some people maybe haven't even heard of it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, where you think broadcast news kind of fits in within modern popular culture. But transitioning now into my thoughts on the film, a large reason of why I wanted to cover this movie is because I think this is a rich text. Like I mentioned, I don't absolutely love the movie, but it is undeniable in its level of craft and its unique kind of a dramedy writing style, which is almost kind of lost to time. This is clearly someone who's done a lot of work on sitcoms and knows how to kind of block a scene in a traditional sense, and is also an excellent writer with some really kind of sometimes a little bit too cute dialogue, but really kind of clever and witty dialogue, which I think makes sense within this world of news people in this type of an era. But the first thing that kind of jumped out to me was that the movie is almost 40 years old now, and yet felt really relevant. This is not just a movie that's, in your face talking about how political and important news is. It can also be entertaining. Yet, though, it is kind of dealing with a lot of the same topics of news that I feel like modern day news people struggle with, which is that idea of how to make money in news and the value of news as news or news as entertainment, and how much of you are you an entertainer versus actual someone who has to present the facts, and can you be both, and kind of these modern day dilemmas that now we're talking about social media and online and the internet and how that kind of changed news, where back then they were talking about that transition from newspapers to TV, and even the idea of broadcast news. I don't know if it's a really kind of resonant modern day term, because every news is broadcast news at this point. So I was really fascinated to rewatch it again, which I've seen the movie before, but this time around really just kind of was struck by, I think, how resonant the movie still is in some of these conversations you can easily implant into the modern day kind of a news cycle. But this is also not, like I said, just a preachy movie. There are a lot of funny moments, a lot of entertaining moments, a lot of just moments of interest in seeing how the news works when it does work well. Like there's this great scene between Holly Hunter's character and William Hurt's character where she's kind of in his ear telling him what to say, and you see how he kind of translates that and says it in real time, and there's kind of this great dance that's going on. And then I think the emotional underpinning of the story is also well done. It's, I think, not direct. It's kind of complex. I don't know if you're supposed to like any of these characters, or maybe you like all of them but don't see them as totally perfect. They kind of all make mistakes. They all have unique points of views. I don't think anyone is directly, easily painted as a villain within this movie. They're all kind of complex, flawed people, narcissistic people. But because you spend a lot of time with them, people ultimately that you care about, and kind of tragic figures because of how somewhat damaged they are, even though they can be funny and witty. There is kind of this deep sadness within the movie, which is why I kind of consider this a classic dramedy. It's not necessarily just a drama, it's not just a comedy, it's kind of all at once, and Brooks is able to kind of toe that line really well, and you can tell he's kind of a master of this genre, and this being maybe the most clear example of that. But even though he is a TV writer, you would think that sometimes the filmmaking would be stale and simple, but that's far from the truth. I think Brooks is really able to use this roaming camera very well, where he almost does like 360 pans as he moves the camera through the newsroom, and he's great at having kind of depth within his camera, so people are constantly walking in front of it. He moves it at a slow pace, but fast enough to kind of keep up the energy of the scene so you see everyone involved. And also I think he's a master of blocking, particularly within actors interacting with a set or a certain place. Sometimes we don't see this as often now when you have CGI, volume, or kind of green screen type scenes where actors can interact with real life places. This movie is just full of that, of just putting someone in a unique kind of maybe even a simple stage, and then blocking them in a unique way by having the actors interact with whatever's going on. I think the most obvious example of that is early on in the story, there's Tom and Jane, and they're meeting for the first time, and they're in their hotel room, and they're kind of sitting down, and they're putting their arms across a bed. And just something odd that someone would do, playful and silly. But I think just the actors, example of the actors interacting with their environment to make it feel a little bit more like they're real people. And then because you have so many people within this ensemble of the newsroom, just interacting and blocking everyone so that you can see everyone's faces behind desks, behind control rooms, moving in and out of scenes. Brooks is able to kind of keep everything very clear and understanding, but also kind of make it feel realistic by having his actors interact with the scene itself, which is, I think, an underrated skill. And then even what I loved about this movie was his use of insert shots, something that is not always seen on TV because you have like a traditional 3-camera setup for like a sitcom. He really uses a lot of inserts in this film, which is different than his TV work, where you'll have a scene where William Hurt's character and Jack Nicholson's character, they'll shake hands, and we're not taking a wide shot of both of the two men shaking hands. We just have an insert shot of the handshake, and you see how kind of firm and consistent it is, and how there's kind of a merging of the two worlds, and they kind of fit together well because it's a strong handshake. But it's also a strong handshake, but also lasts a little bit too long, and there's a strong grip there, trying to maybe establish dominance between the two. So you can kind of read it in both kind of different ways, because Brooks is, I think, wisely understands that we're not interested in the actual handshake and the facial reactions, as you can tell everything about the power dynamic between these two characters by that just insert of a handshake. And there's many scenes like that within this movie. Watch the next time you see the movie, the use of inserts within the film. I think it's just another way of, James L. Brooks as a filmmaker is able to enhance this already great script with all these great actors and great characters. It's the way his actors kind of interact with existing scenes, the way he kind of moves his camera to keep the energy up of the broadcast area, and then also his use of inserts to really highlight specific character dynamics, I think is a unique and underrated filmmaking part of this film. So there really is just something that kind of sings to this movie. It's very entertaining and moves quickly. You're interested in the characters. There's something very true and realistic to the movie. It is, in my mind, kind of like this quintessential dramedy. It is maybe a little bit too cute and a little bit too writerly at times, but I allow it just because it's in a room full of writers. It's about that, so you kind of allow that a little bit. But I think the people who really do resonate and connect with this movie connect to some of those great pieces of dialogue and the complicated characters. So it's a movie that I think is very interesting in that it's clearly good, it's clearly very entertaining, it's clearly very relevant, and yet the people that are holding it up are the people who are like the film fans that go back and watch movies. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Is this still a resonant movie? Do people still go back and rewatch this movie? Do the general public knows about this movie? Love to hear all that stuff in the comments down below. But yeah, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you do comment below. And until next time, stay tuned.